First of all, my name is Joseph Ingram, and I'm the president of the North-South Institute. And I've been told the first thing I have to say is that there is simultaneous interpretation. For those who need headsets, they're available at the translation booth, at the interpretation booth. So feel free, return them, please, when you've finished with them. The second thing I have to say, and I'm not sure what this means, but I've been told to correct the Twitter hashtag. And apparently this is the correct hashtag. We originally had hashtag GNR Forum, but I was told GNR sounds too much like Guns N' Roses. So we were told to change it. And so this is the hashtag for those of you who are tweeters. Anyway, let me begin, and I want to thank everybody and welcome you to the Ottawa Forum. And for those who are coming from long distances, welcome to beautiful Ottawa. It was supposed to rain today with thunderstorms, and that may yet happen, but at least this morning it's beautiful, and we've got a bit of sun. I hope you can benefit from it in the next 2 days. I especially want to thank our distinguished speakers, many of whom have come a long way to be at this 2-day conference. A number of people have come directly from a conference on the same subject in Kuwait, and they arrived yesterday evening after 22 hours of flying. So we're delighted that they were able to come and that they felt that this was an important enough event to sacrifice that kind of travel and the fatigue involved. As president of the North-South Institute, I'm honored to be your official host. I've been allocated 15 minutes to speak. That was a bad idea, since those who know me realize that sometimes I have a tendency to abuse that sort of privilege. This time, however, I'll try to remain within the limits. Before the formalities, I'd like to say a few things about the significance of this meeting. It comes at an opportune time, and Dean Allison and I were talking about this just a few moments ago, in the sense that the theme governing natural resources for Africa's development is emerging as one of the globe's defining development challenges. Suddenly, Africa is becoming the center of attraction for many of the world's fastest growing economies, and for many of its most opportunistic investors, Canada included. The unprecedented growth globally in the middle class, and there are estimates that today's middle class, depending on how you define it, is anywhere from 2 to 2.3 billion people. Much of it in China, India, Brazil, and other rapidly emerging economies is accelerating the demand for natural resources. And Africa has them in abundance, with relatively little exploited to date. Growth of many of Africa's economies has, over the past couple of decades, accelerated as a result, and thanks to increased investment, has been sustained at amongst the highest levels on the planet. Some 23 African economies have broken away from the pack, so to speak, emulating the Asian tigers, at least in terms of improved trade balances and growth. The prevailing narrative about Africa has changed from one of a lost cause distinguished by stagnant economic growth, entrenched poverty, disease, chronic failures of governance, and war, to one of a hopeful continent, Africa rising, as The Economist titled a special edition in 2011, and emerging Africa, as Steve Radley, now the chief economist at USAID, called it in a book that he published in 2010. Yet when Africa's economic growth is examined more closely, high growth rates notwithstanding, there is no room for complacency. The picture is much more nuanced. Although poverty in absolute terms has declined on the continent, and this is a huge accomplishment, social indicators reveal that high GDP growth, notwithstanding high GDP growth, sub-Saharan Africa remains by far the world's most impoverished area. 33 of the world's 49 low-income economies are in Africa, and the region is farthest from achieving the targets of the Millennium Development Goals. Some 400 million Africans live in extreme poverty, almost half the continent's population. Recent droughts and the global financial crisis have made things worse. Moreover, with the exception of Uganda and Ethiopia, those countries where GDP growth has been high have seen income inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, increase, widen. What this suggests, then, is that governments need to be paying more attention to the quality of their growth and ensuring that financial resources mobilized through natural resource exploitation are both optimum in volume and spent to support broad-based development. This means investments from the private sector, from the public sector, that create jobs for the world's youngest population. 60% of the population is under the age of 30, that add local value and reverse the trend of deindustrialization. Not industrialization. The trend has been of deindustrialization, namely ensuring that investments, both public and private, contribute to an objective of broad-based development, namely and that natural resources contributes to a broad-based development of the continent, thereby closing the growing income inequalities, contributing to social cohesion, and ensuring a stable environment for both local and foreign investors, Canadian investors included. The focus of next month's G8 meeting in the UK also highlights the importance of this forum, with the G8 seeking to establish a common set of transparency and accountability standards for their investors and ultimately beyond, especially in the area of natural resource exploitation and extractives included. I believe that with the speakers that we brought together here today, including senior policymakers from a number of key African governments, from the African Union and UNECA, from the World Bank, the OECD, the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, the Natural Resource Charter, Transparency International, the EITI, the extractive sector itself, academic experts in the field, and key policymakers in the Canadian government, we have the elements to produce some meaningful conclusions about how best to move forward on this important agenda. Natural resources are a vital source of economic growth and well-being, both for host countries and economies home to foreign investors, such as Canada, if they are developed in a responsible way. If not, they can be the source of what many of us who have worked in development and public finance in Africa over the years have experienced as a resource curse. On that cheery note, let me conclude my duties by expressing a few words of appreciation to those who've made this event possible. And I want to thank in particular NSI's institutional supporters, namely the former CEDA, the new Department of Development, and Minister Fantino, and the IDRC. Amongst the sponsors for this forum, I'd like to thank EDC, Export Development Canada, especially Yolanda Banks and Diane Belvaux, Tech Resources, Doug Horswell, who will be speaking to us over the next 2 days, Kinross Gold Corp, particularly Ed Opitz, their Executive Vice President, and I'd like to thank CG, the Center for International Governance Innovation, who are sponsoring our luncheon. Also, for the dinner this evening, I'd like to thank the World University Service of Canada, Chris Eaton, its Executive Director, and of course, as I said earlier, all our speakers who've come from far, the organizers and the volunteers, all of whom are attending. And finally, I'd like to thank members of Parliament, particularly Dean Allison, Lois Brown, the permanent or parliamentary secretary to Minister Fantino, Helen Laverdière from the NDP, and Tyrone Benskin. And also the visiting delegation from the Association of Canadian Community Colleges, who are here, and many of them have come from a number of African countries, and I want to thank them for coming, as well as representatives, I think, from Latin America who are here as well. And finally, people from the diplomatic community. There are a number of embassies here in Ottawa whose representatives are attending. Finally, on some housekeeping changes, a couple of changes in the program. There was a paper at the desk mentioning that unfortunately our speaker from Rio Tinto could not be here. And I want to thank Natural Resources Canada for volunteering to take the place of Ginny Flood, who was a former Natural Resources Canada person. Is that 5 minutes? 1 minute, all right. And I want to thank Patrick Chevalier in particular, who will be speaking on behalf of Natural Resources Canada. And Lois Brown, who is not in the old program. You don't have Lois's name. She's the parliamentary secretary. She will be making the closing remarks tomorrow evening. So I want to thank her for agreeing to do this as well. Finally, let me just add, there are going to apparently be some demonstrations in front of Parliament Hill today, we were told, and some of the streets may be closed, but that's no problem for you because you're all going to be in here with us. But just in case you do decide to wander out, don't get caught up in, I don't know what kind of a protest it is, but that may happen. Please keep your name badges, by the way, for entry tomorrow. You'll need them tomorrow, and for the gala dinner. Also, Wi-Fi is provided to our participants on a first-come, first-served basis. Unfortunately, we only have 40 a day, so if you need Wi-Fi, you better speak to Dina or somebody at the desk, and they'll arrange for you to get Wi-Fi. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask the NSA staff and volunteers for any needs you might have, or myself if you need something. So with that, I'd like to kick that off and ask Dean Allison, the Honourable Dean Allison, who's the Member of Parliament and Chair of the Foreign Affairs and Development Committee, to open the forum. Thank you, Dean.